Howdy folks, I'm Tom and this is my backyard. Wanted to make a video to introduce you to this channel and describe what it is that I hope to do with it. So I am a second year gardener who lives in zone 8B just outside of Dallas, Texas, slightly east of the Metroplex. And I am making this channel to talk about backyard gardening in restricted space. So when I moved into this house about 6 years ago, I really wanted to put in a garden, but I was discouraged because of the small space and the L shape to the backyard. And what you can see is that because of the shape of the backyard, we have quite a bit of shade. So currently we're looking to the west. And so in the winter time, as the sun sinks lower in its path across the southern sky, we get quite a bit of shade from the tree you see over there and from our house. So for 6 years, I didn't put in a garden. Finally, though, last year, 2024, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to give it a shot and put it in. And you know what, I had a lot of success. Now, when I had done some research online in terms of gardening in tight spaces or gardening in shade, I found some information, but not a ton. And so I decided that I would just put up some videos this year as I go through my growing season, so that other people who are looking to garden in a similar situation have just an additional resource that they can look at. Now, as you can see, I've got some plants in here. So it is currently the second week of January, and we are coming out of a 10-day stretch of freezing weather. And when I say freezing, I don't mean 32 degrees. I mean it got down into the 20s. And that is very strange in Texas, especially this part of Texas. Out in the Panhandle, it's a little more common, but here in North Texas, we don't get that kind of cold weather very regularly. And certainly not that many days of cold weather in a row. But you can see that a lot of my plants have come through really well here. So this is my fall garden. And what I put in was a bunch of cabbage and collard plants. There's a couple other things mixed in, but a lot of those were volunteer seeds. As far as collards, I put in mostly Georgia green, and there's a couple Alabama blue. You can actually see right here an Alabama blue plant, so called because it has the blue veins. I also put in some arugula or rocket. And then for cabbages, I put in early Jersey Wakefield. Okay, and here's a good example of one right here. And this one's actually so pretty, I want to let it go to seed and see if we can't use it again or breed off of this plant for next year. So as I mentioned, I'm a second year gardener going into my second year. So I've only completed 1 year. What I did with this bed is it's not necessarily a raised bed. My yard has quite a bit of slope to it, which is kind of difficult to see in this video. Maybe if I step back a little bit, you can tell. So to combat any kind of erosion or runoff, what I did was I lined the outside of the area I wanted to garden with these cinder blocks. And then I went back with the shovel and I turned up the soil inside those cinder blocks and then leveled it out. I actually sunk this row of cinder blocks here because the slope was particularly bad. And that allowed me to level off the surface inside on which to grow. And I did plant within these spaces in the cinder blocks as well. Now, I mentioned that I turned this over with the shovel. We have what we call black gumbo here. So clay type soil, very high clay content. And so what I did in order to kind of combat some of that compaction is after I turned the soil over, I broke it up when it dried, and then I brought in, I want to say it was maybe 4 cubic yards of compost and spread that down to mix in with it. And that's kind of a one-time, you could say, amendment to try and get this going. And I've actually been very happy with the way that it did. And we didn't have a ton of issues with compaction. I seem to be able to mix in that compost pretty well with the soil. And like I said, we had some pretty good results. Now what you're looking at here is onions. So I mentioned it's the second week in January. I want to say it's January 12th, if I'm getting that right. And so we are putting onions in. It might be a touch early for the onions, but they showed up a touch early. I wasn't expecting them until this next week, but they showed up early, and so I wanted to go ahead and get them in the ground. Something that I've done to try and combat the fact that I get a lot of shade in this garden is I've adjusted my planting windows. So this fall garden that I've got in here, cabbages and collards. A lot of times if I had a bunch of sunlight, direct sunlight, they would get too hot to plant in August and September. But I actually started all these plants at the end of August. And the reason I was able to do that is because we get a lot of shade on this area. You can see I'm walking in the shade now. I should mention it's not even 2 p.m. Well, because of that, I knew, hey, as the sun sinks lower down in the southern sky, we're going to get more and more shade. And so I knew I had to get these plants established before we lost a lot of our sunlight. So I started my fall garden earlier. Well, the opposite is true for my spring garden. I actually have to start my spring garden a little bit later. I did a direct seed sowing back in, I want to say February or March of 2024, and just about everything from that failed. And the reason it failed is because we just did not get the sunlight that we needed in here. So what I've done to combat that is I've actually set up a little seed starting station in my garage with some grow lights and some heat pads. Now we're going to give that a shot this year. Now last year what I did was I just used clear plastic cups, just cheap ones you can buy at Walmart, filled them up full of pot and soil, and I would start my seeds in those, and then I would move them about the yard throughout the day so they stayed in the sunlight. And then I transplanted from those. And that worked pretty well, but that requires coming out here several times a day. And I am blessed to be able to work from home. I've got a job that lets me work from home. And so I would run out here real quick, move them, and get back to work. But rather than having to do that all the time, I set up that seed starting station. We'll go in there and look at that here in a little bit. So that's how I've adjusted my planting windows to accommodate the fact that we've got all this shade. Now, before we go look at the seed starting station, I just wanted to look at some of these plants real quick. I mentioned it got down into the 20s several times. These are Georgia green collards. You can see they have done really quite well. This is our first day to be above freezing in about 10 days. And forgive some of the mess, these things got knocked over. We had some high wind and ice. And this is, like I said, my first day to be able to get out here, first day above freezing. It's actually in the 50s today. I think we may have kicked up above freezing yesterday, but not for very long. Here's a early Jersey Wakefield cabbage, just about ready to pick. And I had some flowers as well that the strong winds we had blew over and messed up a bit. But so these collards really came through pretty well. And the cabbages look phenomenal as well. I did plant a purple cabbage, you can see here. It's kind of a late addition. It'll be interesting to see as the days get longer if that turns into anything. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our onions that we put in here. Now we just set these in today. So I need to water these in. But what I did was between these rows of onions, I actually dug a trench. And I put some triple 13 fertilizer and some bone meal to get the phosphorus content up. And that was per the recommendation from the place I bought these starts from, which is Dixondale Farms down, I believe, out of Carrizo Springs. And I've got 1015s, Red Creole, and Texas Early White in here. Now I do use fertilizer. I'm not one of those folks that doesn't use fertilizer. I don't use a ton of it. But last year when we put onions in this bed, they didn't get very big. And so I thought perhaps they might might benefit from some fertilizer. I didn't fertilize them last year and they stayed pretty small. It's actually one change I made. So this bed right here gets quite a bit of sunlight in the spring and summer. The sun gets high enough that the tree doesn't shade this very much. And actually that back corner gets the most sunlight of all of it. And so I moved the onions to this bed, try and let them get more sunlight. And I've tried the fertilizer as well. One thing I don't do, and definitely won't ever do, is spray pesticides. And the reason being is I've got small children, and they come out here and they know which plants they can eat raw, and they just pick those and start eating on them. So I've got to be careful, with any kind of herbicides and pesticides. And so I don't spray either of those things. I don't use herbicides or pesticides because I worry about the kids getting into something I've done that with. And plus I also just I save the seeds as well, and so I want to see the plants that are largely unaffected or very, very small, have a very small effect from bug damage, and I save the seeds from those. So for example, this cabbage over here that I said I was going to save seed from, it doesn't have a whole lot of pest damage to it. Whereas the one right next to it that I've already harvested, you can see had a significant more amount of pest damage to it. So I want to save seeds from this one because for whatever reason it seems to be more resistant to the insects. And it's going to be the same thing with my collards. I've got a little collard plant over here. This one right here. Basically no pest damage whatsoever. There's a couple of them that are like that. This one right here, almost no pest damage. And look at how well this has bounced back from all that freezing weather we had compared to the one right next to it that's still kind of droopy. So I'm going to let this one go to seed, and I'm probably going to save the seeds from it. So one last look at the garden, and then we'll go in and I will show you my seed starting station. Okay, so this is the seed starting station. So what it is just 2 wire racks that I've got here. I have some T80 grow lights from Baria. I've got some heat pads down here on the bottom. And then you can see here I've got some onion seedlings that I've started here as well. Now I'm trying soil blocking. I mentioned that last year I started everything in clear plastic cups, and I suppose you could do that as well underneath these grow lights, but I'm trying soil blocking this year. That just seemed a little cleaner. It's not proven to be that way yet, but it's a learning process, and honestly I kind of like piddling around and learning about new things in the garden as well. So it's been fun trying to learn about it. These are Texas early grano that I've got here. I believe it's what they call a noonday onion. I think it's kind of like a Vidalia onion. And I started these in December, and they've been growing pretty slow, and so I'm not terribly hopeful for them, but we'll see what happens. And then over here I'm starting a couple more, plus some violets that have not been coming up. Now mind you, it's been getting down into the 20s at night, and so even though they're on these heat mats stay about 74, 75 degrees. The air above them is still, 30 something degrees in this garage. So I think that's probably why they've had a little trouble with their germination. Plus violet seeds, I'll be honest, I've had a little trouble with them in the past, and they're just such a small seed, they're kind of finicky. So this is the setup. I've been starting my seeds in cocoa coir. I took that off the recommendation of a lady that I found on YouTube who does flower gardens. I forget her name. Regenerative Bloom or something like that. I apologize, but got them started here, and then I can move all this stuff that I have stored up to the top shelf and expand up here. I can add more lights over here if I need to, but this is going to give me a good area to start things such as peppers and tomatoes that have a longer starting or a longer growing season and need to be started pretty soon. Here in Texas, tomatoes don't mind the heat, but if you don't get them established and outside before the heat kicks in, they'll have trouble setting fruits. So I tried tomatoes last year, and they failed miserably. I never got a single fruit off of them. I was able to grow a lot of things like what you might call southern peas or cow peas, so purple whole peas, black-eyed peas. I had a lot of success with those, with cucumbers, with okra. The onions did pretty good. They didn't get big, but we had quite a few of them. I'm trying to think what else. And I planted a bunch of flowers too, and so we had some really pretty zinnias and some really pretty sunflowers. And that was kind of what we were successful with. We had some watermelons we grew as well, and some cantaloupes. And I'm not going to do those again. Those were a little too big. They take up too much space, I should say, for my small garden. And so, yeah, we'll talk here in just a second about what I'm going to grow this year, how it's different from last year, and kind of my plan for the garden. Okay, lastly, let's talk what I want to plant this year. So you've already seen the onions that I've got out there. I'm going to leave a couple of those collards and a couple of those cabbages to go to seed. But largely, after we start picking on them and it warms up, we'll cut those out. And I imagine they'll start bolting as it warms up, so we'll take them out. And what I'm planting this year is basically try to redeem myself from last year. So I'm trying a bunch of stuff this year that I didn't manage to grow last year, and just see if, hey, I can actually do this by starting earlier inside. And so I buy from a couple different people here. Last year I bought everything from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and had a lot of good luck with them. So you can see I've got some packages from them again. But I also tried Baker Creek Seeds and Johnny's this year just to try some new folks. So what you can see over here, starting with Johnny's, is I've got some hybrid sunflowers that are made specifically for cutting. So we grew a bunch of sunflowers last year and cut them. They were evening sun sunflowers, beautiful, but they have a lot of pollen. And so when you cut them and put them inside, they get your table all dirty. Well, these are hybrids that are pollen free. I've got some marigolds that I'm going to try. Only one marigold survived last year. I've got some tomatoes. These Valencia, it's a yellow tomato. And then some ballerina zinnias. Now, I'm also going to try my hand at chamomile and thyme. These chiltepine peppers, chiltepine or chili pekin is something else they've been called as well. It's actually the state pepper of Texas, and so I wanted to try growing them. We've got some bergamot. Over here we've got jalapenos and serranos. Arkansas little leaf cucumbers, that's a climbing cucumber, and I'm going to turn those into pickles. We had a lot of fun making pickles last year. I used Space Master last year, and they did pretty good, but I just wanted to try something different. Cherokee purple and San Marzano tomatoes as well. And then these are seeds that I saved from the garden last year. So bowling red, okra, basil, dwarf sunflower, and zinnia. So these are all things that I let go to seed in my garden. Now that bowling red okra, we may find out is a hybrid, because I also had some Clemson spineless as well. So that's going to be kind of fun to see what actually comes out of that. So this is everything I want to plant in the spring. And then let me kick over and show you what I want to plant in the summer. Okay, for the summer planting, you'll notice that there's only going to be 4 additions. A lot of the spring planting will actually last through the fall. If I can keep it alive, keep it watered, and if I succession plant it properly. And what I've got here is I've got some pinto beans. That'll be new. And then I got 2 different kinds of purple hull peas. We got pink eye purple hull top pick, sometimes called Texas top pick, and then green Dixie black eye. And that's going to be a new one for us, green Dixie black eye. Last year we did the Texas top pick. It did really well. We enjoyed it. And so what we're actually going to do is we're going to pull out, when we pull out all of our onions about May, we're going to plant these pinto beans and these black-eyed peas and purple hull peas where the onions are currently. And then we're going to try something fun, this amaranth. It's called Hopi red dye. And this amaranth is a little grain. I've never seen it before in person. I've only seen pictures. My wife saw it and thought it'd be pretty for fall decoration. So apparently it likes heat. So we'll plant it late and see if we can't get a nice fall crop for her to use for decorations. So like I said, I'm planting a lot of stuff that I couldn't get to grow last year, and so this is just going to be kind of a redemptive year for us. But additionally, you'll notice I planted a lot of the ingredients for salsa. And so I've got a buddy that likes to make salsa, and so I planted some of the ingredients. So, you know, the jalapenos, the serranos, the onions, and the San Marzano. That's a type of paste tomato, aroma type tomato. And so I'll be able to give those to him that he can use in making his salsas. So kind of a salsa garden. So not a huge variety, but again, kind of a redemptive year, and I just want to see if we can't make it work in this shady garden we've got. I'll go ahead and tell you, I'm going to put those peppers in the north garden bed on the side closest to the house, and it's where I showed you those collards and cabbages were earlier. And the reason being is apparently peppers actually like some shade, some partial shade. And so that part of the yard gets shade in the afternoon and evening. And so we're going to see if perhaps we can use the shade to our advantage in growing these peppers. So that's the plan for this year. I hope you guys come along with me. Like I said, I've got no great designs for this channel. It's just I really enjoyed gardening. I thought it was a fun puzzle trying to figure out how to work with this unique shade situation that we've got going on, growing in this hot, humid climate that we have as well, and clay-filled soil, and it's been a lot of fun trying to figure it out so far. And so hopefully you guys enjoyed just kind of watching how things grow and progress this year. Thank you for your time. Hope to see you back.